Hi and welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. It's me, Scott Martin, and thank you very much for tuning in. Also, happy Easter. It's that time of year where we get to hopefully spend some quality time with family and friends and with your trees and have a bit of a break. You know, put your feet up for a couple of days and appreciate the finer things in life that make you happy. It certainly is what I use my Easter break for anyway. But, my God, my place stinks. Like so much stink around the place. I've been fertilising like crazy, absolute crazy. So there's been a few questions asked about the contraption that I use to fill the tea bags with. So I'll be putting a few posts up on Instagram about that too, just to sort of show how it works. It's not rocket science. It's just an upside down bottle onto a tea frame with a bit of a spring latch at the bottom of it and an agitator inside, just in the form of a bit of aluminium wire. But as it gets stuck, I can sort of break it apart and it keeps flowing, and means that filling tea bags for me now is only about 3 to 4 hours per batch, as opposed to days. So it does work well. So thank you for tuning into this podcast. Let's get into it without any further ado. So, like most places around the world, there's the dubious side to bonsai with theft. And I was going to talk in this podcast anyway about holding on to the past and what I think your actions need to be. Just a little reminder, and I've talked about this in different formats throughout earlier podcasts over the years. And I had a phone call come through recently from someone I know very close to me that they were at the police station actually lodging some theft claims on a couple of their trees, and it actually makes me really, really sad, as it would everybody, because one of these trees in particular was a cedar, an Atlantic cedar, green Atlantic cedar, and it I remember it starting its first styling process with me years ago. And we came up with a plan. We did all the stuff that I talk about, long-term vision. And this particular fella was really, I don't want to rush it. I want to get this right. And it was just step by step by step, workshop after workshop and year after year on this thing. And it was actually, it was really starting to look magnificent, really nice. The branches were set in place first up. Then we started working on the secondaries. We'd done a bit of wiring with the trunk. Wanted to have at the start it was to be a formal upright, and then it sort of transitioned a little bit to an informal upright. Got the spacing of the pads perfect, started working on the secondary branching, and it was really, really coming together nicely. The apex was forming beautifully, so much so that it had gone into a bonsai pot and then progressed to a more elegant pot, and then thirdly to something high quality. So it was, to hear the fact that it had been stolen or taken away from this fella part way on its journey, but a long way on its journey, was really, really sad. And I don't know where these trees disappear to, but they seem to just vanish into thin air. There's been a few thefts around the area, as there is all around the world, I suppose. And I think this is just one of those community service announcements to everybody listening, to just be mindful that it's, no matter what, you've got to protect them as much as you possibly can. And I don't know what options we've really got, bar a couple of big dogs that'll tear your arms off. But if thieves want to take something, I presume they're going to take it. But anyway, I was just going to talk. Part of the podcast was about what to do when you have an inevitable setback. And it's funny, I'd planned all these things I was going to talk about, and what to do, and that you might be scared to take action in future because something's happened in the past. And then I got this phone call about this theft, and this poor fella's in the same boat where he's like, "That's it, I'm done. I'm throwing my hands in the air. I'm going to walk away." It's like, just draw a breath, just give it some time, let daylight settle on it. I know it's not easy for you now, but if you give it a little while, a couple of days, a week, just try and think of what it was that you loved about bonsai, and not necessarily about the trees that were taken, because chances are you'll never see them again. But, if in a perfect world you change your scenario and you can look at securing the trees and you can stop these degenerates from doing the same thing again, then what would you do? How would you take it up again? And what would your vision for the future be? And luckily, well, I think it's very luckily for his personal situation. He sent me a lovely message the next day saying, "No, that's it. They're not going to stop me. I love it too much. I love bonsai. I love trees. So I'm going to reignite my passion. I'm going to keep taking steps forward." And it was like, that's so cool, So that is what I wanted to mix into this first part of the podcast, being that, when shit happens, when stuff goes wrong, when there's a setback of any kind. My original setback was going to be talking about, if you have a branch break off, or if, you knock something over, or, it dies or whatever. Not theft. Theft didn't even cross my mind, but when something happens with your bonsai, I think that you've got to, really reevaluate and say, is this going to affect what I'm going to do in the future? Am I going to be scared to take action because of something that's happened in the past? And because I see that a lot with I'm scared to decandle because I decantled once before and the results were shocking. Or, I'm scared to repot because last time I repotted this tree, it died. And I think that my approach to it is that, if something has gone wrong, then try to learn from that situation. Look at what's happened, ask others, see if there's some kind of, light that can be shed onto the situation, because normally it's either it's one of two things I found. It's either a strength of the tree issue, so things have pushed the tree too far, or the other is it's a technical issue. It's how you've performed what you've performed. So it might be, for instance, repotting out of season could be what's done it. Could be, I've repotted that tree a million times that time of year, and this time it's finally done it. Well, it's, sooner or later things catch up with you. If the tree keeps getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker, well, then there's got to be a tipping point. Whatever that tipping point is more often than not the reason. It's not the reason why the tree's died. It's because of all the things that have accumulated over a period of time through poor application of technique, or just not knowing what the right thing to do is. It's that accumulation of those things that sooner or later catches up with you. And that's the learning that I was going to sort of talk about today, is just to reiterate that, that when things do go wrong, you snap a branch when you're wiring, that's shocking. It's terrible. But, why did it happen? Because the application of the wire wasn't correct, or you made the bend in the wrong spot. So therefore it falls into the technical side of things. Tree died after repotting. Why did it die after repotting? Was it, maybe it's not the technical side of repotting itself. It could be the aftercare. Right? So that's a learning experience for you. That's something to gain and take away with you, that, I need to make sure that from now on, whenever I do this task, I do it like this, and I definitely don't do it like that, because that's where the negative comes from. The negative shouldn't be a barrier to say, well, I am never repotting a tree ever again, because that's not how it's going to work. You've got to take these steps forward. You've got to be on the front foot with your bonsai, and you've got to take steps forward and not be held back. And the last thing that I want to push with this part of the podcast is just to remember that by going slow, you're going to get there faster, much faster. By taking your time, by having that plan in place, by making sure you follow the steps at the right time of year, by drawing breath, by just stopping, you're definitely going to achieve what you want to achieve a hell of a lot faster, and everyone's going to be happier. Your bonsai, but more importantly, you as well. So I wanted to jump back to one of my trips to Japan. This one was back in 2015. So I'd been there. This was my fourth trip to fourth trip to Japan, third trip to Aichi. And when I first left, I'm not going to go into it in depth like I did some of the other trips, so it's not going to drag on. So don't switch the podcast off just yet. But just a brief summary. When I look through my notes, it's funny how the emotion of what you write, looking back at things. Like, I've never been a diary keeper. I've never been one to document things like this, but I deliberately did with these trips because, as I said, they're a learning experience for me, and my learnings, I thought, would come from the technical information that I wrote in there and the how-tos and the breakdown of technique. Whereas I think a lot of what I've learned looking back through these pages and pages that I've written in these little notepads, it's more where I stood on things and how things changed for me. And that's what I want to talk about in this podcast, was how I could look back to my first trip where it was like, you can imagine a kid waking up in the morning seeing that, Santa's been, it's like that bright-eyed, you're lost in wonder, and it's amazing. It's wow, this is incredible. How long has this thing been going on for? This is truly the best thing since sliced bread. Whereas now, after 4 years and having made the decision in there at some stage too to start my business Bonsai Matsu and to seek to provide as much information as I could, these later trips, especially this one in 2015, it was like the point of an arrow, where I went from sort of like being amazed and wowed by sort of everything that I looked at, every little stone on the ground or every little leaf on every tree that I looked at. So this was really, my notes were really precise and succinct, and to the, like, it was like the very specific things on, for instance, one of the things that I talk about is wiring and seating my wire to make sure that it's nice and it's not too tight around the tips and there's no looping, and it's got to be to a point where the wire has to be perfect. Like, it just got to be, the loop seats have to be just right. So when you're going around the tip of a pine, for instance, that loop that you make around those needles, if it's done incorrectly, can squish them together. It can be too wide to do anything good. But when the loop seating is just perfect, then you get to control where those needles are positioned, and you can make your pads perfect from it. And it's something you have to learn. Like, you don't intuitively go for these things, but it's a learned thing. And some of my notes were about that. So that's what I want to get into as well over the podcast. But first part was that, my notes were, I had to fly from Melbourne to via Singapore. There was shocking turbulence, and if you can just imagine in your head the world's worst flyer when it comes to turbulence, that's me. That is me. Like, I seriously say my Hail Marys. I kiss my loved ones goodbye. It's something about turbulence that I just cannot get my head around. And I was flying a lot, and it just doesn't seem to get better for me. And even now, like all these years later, when I fly and there's turbulence, it's sort of like, my knuckles go white and my claws get stuck into the seat, and it's just something about it. I know you have more turbulence on a bus or on a train, but it's just something about it that knocks the wind out of my sails. Anyway, that's a bit too much information about me. Anyway, so land there, 15 hours it took me on a plane out of Melbourne, land in Nagoya, and then had to get a train to a station, one of the local trains, which is not unusual, and I was picked up at 9:50, straight into the nursery. Got to see a few of the fellas that I'd met there before, and as soon as I walked into the nursery, a tree was put on the bench. My suitcase was wheeled to the side, and we were told, "Don't worry, we'll check into the hotel later on. You'll be fine. Here's your first tree." And it's like, I forgot how intense this is. And then one of the fellas there called it apprentice style. It's being absolutely and thoroughly exhausted, but still doing what's expected of you and to the best of your ability. So I found that, looking back on it now, and my notes say, it's such a learning experience for me that if I'm going to be, doing what I do as working with bonsai, there are going to be times where you're tired. And the last thing that you can do is cut a corner. When I start repotting can go for hours and hours and hours. It can be, very, very long days, waking up as the sun's coming up, getting into it, and then stopping as the sun's going down that night, because there's an allocated time window for me to do these things. So you have to really put your back into it, and you don't have more time. Like you don't have an endless window for this stuff, so you have to do it. And it was really to me that, you have to prove to yourself that you are going to give it everything you've got, and working when you're tired with these things, not to the point that it's dangerous. Like I'm not saying go out there and operate heavy machinery after 20 hours of flying and travel, but you're working with plucking needles and putting wire on trees, and it's actually good. I found it, like my notes are talking about the next day, that I'd worked on things, and the first day I wrote about 4 times, I can't wait to go to bed. I can't wait to go to bed. I can't wait to go to bed. But even after being completely buggered, I still sat down and wrote all these notes about my first day on the trip, because I knew one day that I would look back at it. No idea. Podcasts weren't even a thing when I wrote these, but I didn't think I'd ever look back on it to share a story with people. But it's my writing is like scribble. I can see how tired I was, and I can still remember this first day as well. And it was uncomfortable. It was really not a pleasant experience for me, but it's a great memory to have. Saying that you've got to always work to the best of your ability, and if it means slowing down to get there quicker, then as I said earlier, that's the way it's got to be. But I still even wrote a section from the first day there about what did I learn today. So it was, I can't push it enough, that these trips were just like an absolute bloody sponge fest for me, because I'd go there, I'd do things, and then it'd be like, okay, rather than just doing things, like when I walk away from this, what can I pick up? Like, what can I take back? What can I get better at? What can I improve? There's never enough. Like I'm never satisfied with learning experiences like this to just walk away and go, yeah, it was a good day. I enjoyed it. Got to work with a couple of trees, got to make them look pretty. End of the day, we had a few beers, a bit of a laugh, and everyone went their own way. It's like, no. It's not what you're here for, mate. You're here for learning stuff. You're here to pick up as many techniques as you possibly can. And I drew notes about positioning of branch tips on to face not straight up, not straight down. And if you got 2 that are side by side, and one's slightly up and one's slightly down, the one that's slightly up is going to get too strong, and the one that's slightly down is going to get too weak. So there's a real pinpointing of fine detail with techniques where I could see. It was an accumulation of what I'd learned in the past. I didn't recover on that again. So it was like, in my mind, in between trips to Japan, because I knew I'd be going back. Like I knew I hadn't finished, so there was always going to be more. There was never, at this point, there was never a last trip. There was never a reason to say, well, that's it. I'm not going to be able to go back to Japan and study anymore. It was like, no. When you've done this one, then you'll be back for the next one. So just keep learning as much as you can and focus on the real fine details for now to accumulate what you've got. And things like how many turns of the wire have to be on a branch before it takes hold past the junction before you can step the wire down to flow to a lighter size wire. It works out being that it's 1.5 turns past the junction with a heavier wire allows you then to tap into that when you're stepping down the wire. And that's where this trip for Japan was. It was really about the pointy end to pick up as many techniques as I possibly could. So then I was given a task which at the time, and I think I've talked about this previously on, not in this context, but on previous podcasts about taking wire off bonsai. And when I was given this pine that had been wired, I was given a task to take the wire off, and the wire had started cutting a little bit, and I looked and went, I'm not sure this is the best way to spend my time when I'm in Japan. I've got 2-3 weeks, whatever it was. Is this really the best thing for me? And then I went, no, you don't. And the way that I was learning in Japan too, it was sort of like you're given a task and you sort of never really moved on for that task until you had learned from it. You'd picked up something, or you'd taken on board what was said to you, and you were using those techniques correctly. So it was like, no, you've been here enough. You know the way this works. Just start removing the wire. And when I started to take it off, they went, okay, so now we want you to unwind the wire. Don't cut it. It's got to be undone by hand. except for these big thick wires down the bottom. They've got to get cut, but the rest of it, copper wire, it's got to be taken off by hand. It was like, okay, that's going to take quite a while. But what the learning lesson from that was, which I didn't pick up until I was about halfway through the tree, it was I can actually see how the wire's been stepped down. I can see how the connections have been made between branches. I can see how you've gone from this sub-branch to that sub-branch and the wire hasn't crossed, but it's got enough strength in between because you've done an extra turn between these two branches. And once that light bulb went off in my head that it's not a menial task, this is another learning task. And it's like anything in life. It's what you make of it, right? So you get given lemonade, you make a G&T. You don't sit there and sulk because it's a lemon. You make something that you're going to enjoy out of it, right? So when I was unwinding this wire, I remember sitting there going, this is actually pretty cool. And it wasn't until I'd finished the tree, they said, actually, that tree was wired by Mr. Tanaka. So it's very unusual or rare for him to wire trees. And we thought that this would be a great experience for you to be up close and personal with how an absolute fourth generation bonsai professional wires trees. And it's like, that is so cool. Like it's almost an honor. It doesn't sound like at the start, hey, take the wire off the tree. It's like, no, take the wire off the tree and learn from it. Pick up something from it. And one of the main things that I picked up was the pitch of the wire and how it changed and how it was adjusted for certain bends as well. Like you could see, because the branches are all set in place, and you could see on the tighter turns on the branch when the wire had sort of compressed back a little bit, and then when it was, just a gentle drop on the branch, the wire started to extend out a little bit, and it was like, this is great. This is stuff that you can be told, but you never actually get to see it this close. And so I didn't throw myself into the task and say, I'm going to get through this as quick as I can so I can get to the next point. It was like, okay, let's just do this properly and see what I can learn. And as I was, doing it, I was writing notes down. Hey, when you're compressing a branch, reduce the pitch of the wire. When you're not, stretch the wire out. And I use that every single day of my life whenever I'm wiring bonsai. Now it's like, okay, what are you trying to achieve with this? What do you want to get out of it? And it's like it came back from me taking wire off a tree in a workshop in Japan to have it fully cemented. I've been told these things. I'd been talked at till I was blue in the face, but when I started unwinding this wire, going, oh wow, this is really cool technique, and now I can see what you've done. Now I know what the result is. This is the finished result of all that bloody hard work and that thought process of putting wire on a tree. All comes from me taking the wire off, and I can have it fully cemented in my brain by spending 5-6 hours just taking wire off a tree, one strand at a time. And it was a brilliant experience. That, like I said, I'd feel terrible now saying, hey, take the wire off my tree, but for me, looking back on that with hindsight up my sleeve, and even at the time, a couple of hours into it, it was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's actually that's quite nice to actually get that. And the next things I've moved on to was really the finesse of wiring. And from my own point of view, and I made a few notes about it, saying that you've got the core basics right. You've got the technique of wire application correct. Now you need the finesse. Now you need the higher end. Now you need to focus on all the little things that make wiring the tool that we use to perfect our bonsai. From an artistic side and horticultural side, that's the catalyst that brings everything together, is that wiring. And I worked on a Japanese white pine in my own workshop today with somebody, and stuff. Knowing that I was going to talk about this today in my podcast, as I was putting the wire on there, it was like, saying to myself, now, do you remember when you learnt that? And it's like, yeah. And remember when you learnt that step down technique? And it all comes back to my time being, up to my neck in bonsai and for hours, 12, 14 hours a day, just immersed as much as I possibly could be in the catalyst of that learning environment that just can't be underrated. Another one of the things that came up, which was a constant with every trip I did, no matter where it was about directional flow and movement of trees. And then I've made a big section of notes, and I had a good old chat about a styling technique that was used at IGN and how they sort of had the directional flow of the tree to one side, and they always moved the tree in that direction, and the side against the directional movement was sort of compressed in, and then the other side was more open and flowing to that side. And I've drawn all these pictures, and it's, I've called it Mr. Tanaka's style, and it's true. It's something that I found. When you talk about things and you look at it and you talk about the style of somebody, it is quite easy to see that where a tree has been fingerprinted by a particular artist, because they all sooner or later take on that same sort of feel to them. Like they're not replicated over and over and over, but you can look at the tree and go, yeah, there you go. That's the style we're talking about. That's it compressed. That's it moving to this side of the apex, and that's the way the trunk moves. So that's the way that it's positioned in the pot, and that's the flow, and they're the openness between the different pads. And it's true that's something that I think as all of us being bonsai artists in one shape or another, which is what we are, then we've got to expect that as well throughout our bonsai life. But I was given on this trip in Japan, partway through, I was given a beautiful Shimpaku juniper to work on, which needed everything: cleaning, thinning, restyling, and wiring, tip to tail, every single thing in there. And it was good because my notes really pushed me towards concentrating. You need to concentrate. And I think the first time that I worked on it, my note says I spent 12 hours wiring and I've still got the apex to go and my back is sore. So yeah, that's true. Sitting down or standing up and wiring on a Shimpaku like that will take it out of you, especially when you know that you've got to work through every single thing. But it's that satisfaction of achieving that, not perfection. Like it wasn't to that point. I don't think anything can be perfect, but really pushing yourself to achieve a higher level with your wiring can make a great deal of difference to the overall end production of the bonsai that you're going to be producing as well. What I found really interesting was looking back at my what did I learn from today's section of the notes for that particular Shimpaku, was that while it's nice to have this thin wire on our bonsai for the really detailed stuff, what happens with it is if you have it too tight around the tip of the bonsai, tip of the branch, then it can cut in really, really quick, which will then result in thickening in that particular section of the branch, which will mean that it's got to get cut off. So as you go towards the tip of your foliage pad or your foliage, then your wiring needs to become a little bit looser to allow for that natural growth that's going to occur in there, and don't get the cut in with the wire. And the other thing that I learnt was that, if you want to push a branch down and you're wiring over and above to the right-hand side, take the right branch. That allows you to continue your junction wiring to stay on top of that set. If you're wiring up and over to the left, then take the left branch. A bit technical for a podcast, but anyway, these are just my notes. And the other thing I made a note on, which I'm not sure that I 100% agree with now. I can see why I made the note at the time, but it was if when you're shaping your trees, look to keep a full silhouette, but always have a plan to replace anything that's too thick with something that's more appropriate in thickness as you get to the next stage in your bonsai. So I can see why I've written that, because it's about the personal satisfaction of having a bonsai that looks nice. But now I tend to approach it where if there's something too thick, it's got to be removed. That whole good structure is good bonsai, which that'll lead me into the next section of the podcast, which is about a Scots Pine that was posted on Instagram recently that sort of got people talking a little bit. I've got a few messages about some branching on that, so I want to talk about that as well to wrap up the podcast. But yeah, so that was interesting, that I can see why in a commercial nursery the focus would be to about silhouette, and I can see why I did it, because I wanted to look nice at the time. But now that my approach would be, it's far better to look to create a solid bonsai and a good structure on a bonsai early than leaving things in place with a plan to remove later. Personal preference, I'm happy to do it either way when I have people in front of me. that say, hey, what should we do? But really, it's got to be one of those things that's focused on that. Good structure is good bonsai. Going back to I think about the first or second podcast I ever did 4.5, 5 years ago. So anyway, with the wiring, one of the big notes I had that I've highlighted and I've circled and I've put asterisks beside and I've made a deliberate note about coming back to somewhere in the future is, and I'll read it to you word for word. The better and stronger your wiring, the easier it is to move/position branches without them wobbling. Now, that's something that I learned over a long period of time, from wiring. There was one point where I remember on one of the trips, I think it might have been into Osaka, where I wired up a tree and thought, wire every branch, because that used to be the way that I'd think that you'd have to wire. You wire the whole tree and then you get the branches and you position them in place so you know what's going to go where. Whereas now I don't. I wire 2 branches, I set those branches, then I move on to the next 2, wire those 2, set those in place, move on to the next 2, and keep working my way up the tree. So I remember on this tree that I'd wired, and I wasn't thinking about, which way the wire was going to be bent. So then when I actually positioned the branches where I wanted them, I actually made the wire loose and sloppy. And so when it came time to present, I was told, hey, next time you put wire on the tree, have you thought about maybe making the wire a little bit tighter because it's a bit sloppy in this area and it's not as good as what it should be? It's like, you should have seen the tree before I adjusted it. It looked great. Like all the wire was on nice and neat. But I didn't take that next step and think, okay, I'm putting wire on a tree. What am I trying to achieve? And that was the big learning I think I got in 2015 was that, you don't just apply wire to a tree. You put wire on with intent to achieve an outcome, and the wire must be used to achieve that. So, you're moving, left and right branch coming forward, then your wire's got to start from behind. So as you position and move those branches forward, the wire tensions. If the wire starts at the front of the tree and goes to those branches, then they move forward. The wire becomes loose and sloppy, doesn't move, that doesn't achieve what you want to achieve, and it wobbles, which is exactly what I said to myself in my note. So then the next big slab of that trip turned into repotting and techniques and stuff like that. So that's for another podcast. I won't dull your senses with talking about repotting and how exciting it is to put wires into a pot that secure a tree. But anyway, you get the gist. This trip was really, really a fine tuning trip, and I found it really important. And actually, it changed my thoughts on that trip, because when I thought back to 2015, there were certain key things that happened and things that I did and whatever, and they were my focus. But then when I read back through my notes, I went, well, the big learning for me was the fine detail. So when your skill set gets to a certain point, then as I always say, there's always more to learn, but it's the fine tuning, it's the finesse, it's the little 1%ers that I talk about that really make a big difference. And if you do workshops with people, or you listen to someone talk at a demonstration or whatever, and there's something that you can take from it, a 1%er that you can add to your skill set, ask the question. I'm sure whoever it is on the other end of, that you're speaking to would love to give you the information and just say, hey, why do you do it like this? And I really like the skill that you've got here. How does that apply to what I'm doing over here? But anyway, that's another part of my my learning cycle through Japan, and my absolute love for what I got out of that environment. But anyway, there's more to come on that. I'll talk in a future one about a little earthquake that I went through as well. So anyway, that's that part. Righto. So there was a Scots Pine that I posted recently on Instagram and Facebook. It's a really nice tree. I like it. Don't get me wrong. I love this thing. I think it's beautiful. It has got a few imperfections in regard to its structure. Now, the tree was originally used as a demonstration tree when Mara Stenberger came out to Australia and came to our local club, and I put it up. I offered it as a demo tree because I really don't like demonstrations. I feel for demonstrators when they get substandard stock, and they've got so much skill and so much to offer and so much that we can learn from them. But when they get a piece of material that, maybe doesn't meet the skill set, then, I personally find that it's a bit of a waste for everyone involved, and particularly disappointing for the demonstrator, because they come all this way to really offer as much as they possibly can, and really they're hamstrung by what's presented to them, and they can only work with what they've got. So anyway, that's where this thing started, and it was all built. That whole tree has been built from 3 branches coming from the back of the tree from one point. It was originally a tree from a Christmas tree farm that was deemed not suitable for Christmas treeing, so it was torn out, and that's when it was saved by somebody, and then I acquired it from there, and it was a stump basically that I'd been building strength on before it got work done a long, long time ago. I can't even remember when the demonstration was done. It might have been about 2012 or something like that. Anyway, so it was styled to a certain extent using this spaghetti branch placement, which is common for parts of the world. Not my cup of tea, but I actually really like having this thing in my collection. And then I had a chance, probably, I don't know, I can't remember, it was maybe 5-7 years ago, to rework this thing. I'd taken all the wire off it, I'd let it grow, I'd let its strength and vigour increase, and I wanted to stay true to some form or resemblance of the original styling that was done way back when. So I kept the spaghetti branching in case, in fact, I sort of enhanced it and I exaggerated and made it stronger and really positioned branches. And part of what I'm all about is openness and honesty with regard to my styling. So with this tree, I could have taken a photo from the front or, a video from the front of the tree, and everyone would have looked at it and said, hey, yeah, love it, perfect, great, well done, awesome. But part of what I do is that the video spin of the trees, and that is deliberately to show the structure of the tree, that that if there's any compromise, if that front view of the tree has something dubious about it, then you'll see it. And I think that's the way, I think that's a good way for a lot of people to learn. When you're looking at photos, you can sort of maybe pause on the video or have a look at it and say, oh, yeah, okay, that's where this comes from. All right, so no worries, I'll take that as a learning experience. Anyway, there's this one branch that's hanging on the left-hand side. If you go back and have a look at it, you'll see it. The lowest branch where it's sort of ugly from behind, but it sits beautifully against the trunk, looks really nice. From the front, I love it, looks magnificent, but, got a few messages about it. The structure, what's the go with that? Like, why? I think it's because it's very different to what I normally do, that it was questioned, and also that I was very transparent about the positioning of it. I didn't rush it, didn't hide it, didn't cover it up. It's like, yep, there it is. Like, like sticking out like proverbial dogs. So you could see exactly what it was, and I made no qualms about it. That does make the tree beautiful from the front, but there's a compromise to it. And, there's a comment on Instagram about, an inlay graft or something like that, to remove that away. And I think long term it'll come off because it annoys me. Like, I look at it and think, I feel fooled by myself by looking at that design from the front. I look at it and go, that's nice. But I go, yeah, you know what? You've got there by compromising the structure of this tree. So I think that, over time it'll be one of those things that I'll look to remove when it pushes me over the point one day. But my purpose for this section of the podcast is that it takes all kinds to make this beautiful bonsai world spin. And we don't all have to like the same thing. We don't all have to style our trees the same way. Yeah, sure, there's compromises. Doesn't have to float everyone's boat, doesn't have to make you happy, but when it does make someone else happy, keep it to yourself. It's you can offer constructive criticism from the point of view that it's that push up. Hey, have you thought about, doesn't mean that you've got to use your moment in the sun to try and knock the wind out of someone's sails. Not that I can't take it, and not that I really mind. I love it when it does create that spark of interest, and hey, it makes me think about stuff, because it's like, yeah, that's what I want. I don't want people just to mindlessly follow what's presented in front of them. I want the artistic intent come out and thought process of building bonsai and structure and whatever to be part of what we do, and it's to our core. But I always say that, be the shining light, be the one that, is the one out there offering the hand up to somebody. Hey, can I help you with that? Rather than, what, that looks ridiculous and you're an idiot. So that doesn't help anybody, and certainly won't make you sleep any better at night. Well, I hope it doesn't anyway. Not that it happened to me in this circumstance, but I do think that when you're in this invisible world and faceless world that we can live in sometimes, that bonsai is definitely part of it, and it should be, you should see it for what it is. Look at it from a positive point of view and maybe have a fresh set of eyes on it and go, you know what, I'd never thought about doing that. It's not what I would do. I can see what you've done with it. You don't even need to make a comment. It's just in your own head as you're looking at it. Study things. I look at every single tree that I see, mine included. I look at every single bonsai, no matter who's made them. They could be made by the bonsai genius guru number one in the world that everyone thinks, cannot make a mistake. The first thing I do when I look at their trees, I think, how can I improve it? How would I change that? How would I improve that structure of that tree? And I don't do it to be disrespectful, and I definitely don't do it to be rude. That's not me. But I look at it and think, what would you do? How would you put your fingerprint on that? And what could be changed? And what in your mind, what in your bonsai eyes would you change to make that perfect? And that's something which I think we should all do. And don't do it negatively. Do it from a positive point of view. And if you've got nothing nice to say, then you just don't have to say anything. That's the simple way. All right, so that brings us to the end of another very enjoyable episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Thank you for sticking around. Hope you've enjoyed it. As always, as I said at the start, happy Easter. It's that time of the year. If you're not listening to it when it's Easter time, well, happy whatever. And if you don't believe in Easter or you don't follow Easter, well, give your trees a cuddle anyway and make sure that you spend time with them, because that's the one thing that unites everybody that listens to this podcast, is that love for those beautiful little trees in those lovely little pots. That never changes. So may your fertiliser stink, may your foliage be strong, may your wiring be tight, and until next time, happy bonsai.